What's up, Flanover? So sorry for the late start. Thought I was going to be able to start on time and then had a task come up last minute. So I had to delay briefly, but we are here a little early. We have 2.5 hours, a little bit under now, 2.5 hours until the first game of this two-night Monday Night Football slate. What do you guys think of this? The two games on a Monday night. I am personally not a huge fan, but I would be a fan if I was not doing content on it. It is only because of the content that I'm doing. Otherwise, I love this. They do kind of dampen the prize pools for Showdown on these two game slates, which I kind of hate. I love Showdown more than anything. But I still kind of like these two game slates because we have three different slates we can play. We can play the main two game slate, which is the one that they focus on, $500,000 to first on DraftKings. And we have both Showdown slates also. So I am still a fan. Despite doing the content, I still do have fun. I think we have one of these next week as well. Anyway, we will get into it. Again, going to go position by position. So the format of this show, because it's a two-game slate, going to be a little bit different. I'm going to start by going through the two-game slate, so the main slate. After I'm done going position by position in the main slate, we'll just look briefly at the Showdown stuff. Honestly, I haven't even looked at the Showdown pricing or anything like that, but I've given a thorough look at all of the usage statistics, all of that kind of stuff. So, that will apply to all slates. I'll be able to tell pretty quickly if there are price tags and ownership numbers that I do like. So again, going to start by going position by position. I do want to give a couple shout outs. So first of all, I always have to remember to remind people, please do, if you have not already done so, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, comment and chat. All of that is very helpful as I'm trying to grow this channel. And let me I'm going to update my banner right now because we did add some subscribers last night. Very cool to see people supporting the channel as I'm trying to grow. I really do appreciate that. And here I'll throw the banner up there, up to over 2,800 now. Just hit 2,811 as of yesterday. Hoping to get to 3,000 within the next couple of weeks, and ideally get to 5,000 by the end of the NFL season. That is the ultimate dream goal. That'll probably be the next goal that I up this to. So if you haven't already subscribed, would appreciate it. The other one is I do want to give a shout out to my wife who works for 3M Abrasives. She produced a show it's called Clash of the Grinders with a bunch of college age students, generally some a little bit older, but in a grinding competition for 3M. She's a marketer at 3M. That is premiering tomorrow. Her reality TV show where they give the winning participant $15,000. Everybody won some money. Really excited for that. She's really excited for that. So if you have some time tomorrow, 11 o'clock premiere, you can go subscribe now at the 3M Abrasives YouTube channel if you have any interest in checking that out. YouTube exclusive reality TV show. Just wanted to give her a quick shout out because she worked really hard on it. I know she's super excited. So if you would support that, I would of course appreciate it. All right. What's up, Justin? I invited Justin to come on for this show, but of course Justin is pitching tomorrow, his final of the season tomorrow. So we'll hold off on that. Maybe in a future week, Justin will join me on one of these shows. All right, we're going to start quarterbacks. We have some good quarterback options on this slate. Now I'll pull up the RotoGrinders optimizer so we can look at the ownership projections here along with the salaries. Josh Allen, as you can see here, projects only slightly better than Joe Burrow. And he is priced significantly higher. Here, I think I maybe need to hang on one second. I want to minimize this. Yeah. Where's the price tag? Oh, it's over here. Okay. Josh Allen, 7,800. Joe Burrow, 6,300. Projection, very, very close. The tough thing is it's really easy to pay up on this slate. So Josh Allen going to be significantly owned anyway. You don't really gain any kind of advantage by that $1,500. I mean, you can do a little bit more by playing Joe Burrow than Josh Allen. You can fit different players into your lineup in general. Honestly, with the projected ownership, and it's not showing up right now. Let me refresh this real quick. It was showing up 20 minutes ago, so I don't know where the projected ownership went. But I might have to pull it up elsewhere if I can't get it working. Okay, here we are. Going back to quarterbacks. Josh Allen at 43% projected ownership. Joe Burrow at 31% here. I will say ownership projections, I've looked several places around the industry. Very, very different everywhere. This is not a slate where, there are some short slate, showdown slates, where you're going to find that the ownership numbers are pretty consistent around the industry. They're within 5 points of each other, whatever. That is not the case at all on this one. So I am going to behind the scenes look at some other ownership numbers just to make sure that I'm not crazy here looking at these, because these numbers, my guess is that Joe Burrow comes in higher owned than this. If it is anything close to this, Joe Burrow is an absolute smash to me. He would be my favorite play on the slate. I think Joe Burrow against the Commanders, also easier to stack than Josh Allen. Like there's just so much going for Joe Burrow. And yeah, looking at interesting. So other places actually have Joe Burrow similar ownership. They have Josh Allen a little bit lower, and then others getting a little bit more ownership. I'm just going to pull up every site that I have access to behind the scenes just to kind of see. And I looked at this a little bit earlier, looked at some of them, but I'm going to do it one more time here because I'm struggling with what I think the actual ownership is going to be. I think we could be surprised here. All right, hang on. But if Joe Burrow is going to be lower owned than Josh Allen, I think that is a mistake. I would rather go to Joe Burrow just in a vacuum. Get crazy. I think getting crazy on a 2-game slate. Actually, maybe before we even go position by position, I should just give the general outline for a 2-game slate, which is pretty similar to Showdown. So you do have to worry about dupes on a Showdown slate. You definitely, if you use close to the full salary cap, you're gonna have to worry about dupes. Even if you don't, a lot of top lineups in the optimizers are leaving pretty significant salary on the table. So there is a real risk of getting duped on this slate. And it's something that I think you can avoid. And it's a lot of the same levers as usual. So if you leave a little salary on the table, that's one way to avoid dupes. If you do things like defense against your quarterback, I think that's a really strong way to avoid dupes. Mega stacking, another way. If you just like full game stack, 5 players from one team, 2 from another team in that same game, I think that is a way that not a lot of people are going to play it to get different. I feel like I listed a few more in my article this morning. Let me check the notes there, see if I'm missing anything. Leaving salary, defense, good quarterback, game stacking, and then just the general, finding some low owned plays. I think we have some pretty interesting low owned plays on this slate. Again, I haven't looked closely at Showdown yet, but I've looked at the 2-game slate. There are some players that interest me at low ownership on the 2-game slate. I imagine it's going to be the same for Showdown also, but we will get there. I'll look at the ownership projections once we get to Showdown. But yeah, starting with the quarterbacks. I think you probably know these quarterbacks. Josh Allen, Joe Burrow. Josh Allen runs a bit. He was dealing with an injury in the last game to his non-throwing hand. Might affect his running a little bit. Sort of unclear if he's going to be a full go in terms of running the ball this week, or if he is going to continue to kind of lay off with the injury to his non-throwing hand. Ted says they messed up the salaries. You can't spend all the money yet. I mean, it's kind of interesting. So it's the leaving salary trick that we can usually do on these 2-game slates isn't necessarily the only thing you need to pull, the only lever you need to pull to avoid dupes here, because I think a lot of people are going to be leaving salary because it just is too easy on the slate. With that said, so you can see here the projection very similar. Josh Allen can just do it, against anybody. It's not the best possible matchup against Jacksonville. I think it's a fine matchup, just doesn't really stand out one way or another. The Jaguars have given up the 9th most DraftKings points per game to quarterback so far this season. I'm not reading too much into those kind of stats yet. DraftKings points allowed, whatever, because it's all this early in the season. It's all based on who have they played. That kind of stuff plays a big factor. So I think we're still kind of figuring out defenses, how good they're going to be. But the Jaguars were kind of expected to be middling coming into the year. I think that they're still a pretty middling defense. So yeah, I think it's a fine spot for Josh Allen. A lot of different ways to stack him up. It's sort of it's complicated because he has so many different pass catchers. It's not very clear who you want to go to with Josh Allen. The one that I think is going to be likely overowned would be Josh Allen to Dalton Kincaid. I think a lot of people are just going to do that, fill in the onesie positions when you get Josh Allen in there. Dalton Kincaid, obviously, you like that. He fills out that tight end position on a pretty, I don't know if I call it weak tight end slate, but it's a difficult tight end slate, not very straightforward. At least there are a lot of like this guy could hit. You can kind of see it with a lot of tight ends, but it's not very clear. So I think a lot of people will just go, okay, if I'm Josh Allen, just throw Dalton Kincaid in there as well. So I think that is one. I noted that as my the combo that I think I'm going to be most light to relative to the field. I think a lot of people are just going to do that. Allen Cook, sort of interesting. Cook somewhat involved in the passing game. Now we don't have to worry about I guess we do sort of. So I usually talk about when we're talking about quarterbacks, how much do you want to stack? Do you always stack? And I think for me, I'm still probably going to think I'm always going to stack, except for maybe Jayden Daniels. I think Josh Allen, I still will always stack him tonight. You obviously don't need to. He could just rush in 2 touchdowns. And we've seen it already. I think week 1, he rushed in 2 touchdowns. You wanted to have Josh Allen without any stacks. I think I'm still going to play it through stacks in general, just to limit the number of things you need to get right, with the possible exception of Jayden Daniels. And we'll talk about that when we get to Jayden Daniels. But quarterback. So for me, my favorite quarterback just in a vacuum is probably Joe Burrow, in part because it is just easier to know who you want to stack him with. A lot of options there for Buffalo. But the main reason that I love Joe Burrow so much tonight is, first of all, the Bengals passing at the highest rate in the league in neutral situations, 70.9% pass rate for the Bengals. Again, highest in the league. Now they're facing the Commanders, who are probably the worst defense in the league at stopping the pass. At least they're like top 3, top 4. I don't know. Definitely up there in terms of their struggles against the pass this year. So you get that elite passing offense against a terrible passing defense where the offense is passing a lot. They get T. Higgins back, so the offense should just be able to hum along. So I really do like Joe Burrow on this slate. The ownership numbers that I've seen are high, but I don't think high enough. I don't think they're as high as they should be. Everywhere I think is somewhere in that 30% range. So if it's going to be in that 30% range, to me, that is too low. And I'll be higher than that on Joe Burrow. He is going to be a priority for me on this slate. I'll stack him up a number of ways. I do think, we'll get to the receivers. Jamar Chase going to be mega chalk. I think that is fair. I think Jamar Chase should be mega chalk. It's that again, it's different degrees of how chalky he is depending where you look. Some places have him more like in the 70s. I've seen places as high as like 88% ownership on Joe Burrow, or sorry, on Jamar Chase. It's hard to argue with Jamar Chase. Just if you want to play Jamar Chase in every lineup today and just get different elsewhere, I would be fine with that. If you want to say, hey, I'm just going to not chase Jamar Chase and hope that that is so much leveling going on. Crutcher says, I think Chase comes in at or below projected ownership because there is so much leveling. That's the hard thing with 2024 DFS is you just never know. Because I often think things like that, and then I'm surprised when we actually see the ownership numbers. But I think you could be right there. I think just lock buttoning Chase, the role is too good. He was complaining after the game last week, a little bit of a squeaky wheel narrative with Chase. You'd think they want to get their star player going, and this is an ideal spot to get him going if they want to. Definitely this is a spot. If you want to just lock button Jamar Chase and worry about the rest of your lineup, I think that's totally reasonable. I don't know that I will. As Ted says, this is also Chase scoring 14 points could be optimal due to salaries. Yeah, he doesn't necessarily. I mean, obviously depends how the rest of the slate goes. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself talking about Jamar Chase. Want to finish talking about the quarterbacks first. So my favorite, Joe Burrow. I actually think it's interesting. I've been playing the underdog dailies, which before I continue, I should give a little shout out here to our guy Crutches, who just won $20,000 on the Showdown Palooza. I forget what it's called. The Primetime Palooza slate won $20,000 last night. So congrats to Crutches on that one. But what I was gonna say is I've been playing a lot of those and sort of surprised that people have not been prioritizing it as much as I kind of thought they would. So like Bijan Robinson going ahead of Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, definitely not a priority. People have been drafting Josh Allen over him. They were drafting Patrick Mahomes over him on the prior Showdown slate. So I don't know if that's really any good indication of how things are going to play things on DraftKings, but I've been sort of surprised how little people were prioritizing that stack, at least on those primetime Palooza slates. So I think Joe Burrow could actually end up somewhere in the 30% ownership range. And if he is, I just think he's such a strong play. Almost all of his production is through the air. So you just stack him up and you hope that you get the right parts of the stack there with Joe Burrow. He could throw for 304 touchdowns. I like it. I like it quite a bit. Outside of Joe Burrow, I think Josh Allen is fine. At this ownership number, that would probably be a complete fade for me at 43% Josh Allen. Again, you can do basically whatever you want. So the $7,800 price tag is not that prohibitive for Josh Allen. But I think Burrow, you can see the projection here. They project so closely that Burrow could very easily outscore him. I think Jayden Daniels could pretty easily outscore him also. Obviously, it's not a coin flip. Allen more likely to outscore Jayden Daniels. But I could see this being a Jayden Daniels running game. I think Jayden Daniels could just run. I think that this is a run funnel defense for Cincinnati. They've given up like 4.7 yards per carry on the year, over 300 rushing yards allowed on the year already. We have the ownership. Okay, the ownership has come up a little bit here on Jayden Daniels. This was a little bit lighter earlier, so I think this is, or maybe I was using a different projection source within here. 19% feels about right. I think this is probably the most accurate, what I would expect the ownership number to be. I shouldn't say accurate because I'm not always right. But yeah, I think 19% feels about right to me for Jayden Daniels. That is not a spot where I'm taking a big stand. I think I'd rather be, again, higher on Burrow, lower on Allen. I also think 8% on Trevor Lawrence on a 2-game slate is just too light. He's the cheapest here. Again, that doesn't really matter. Not a huge factor here. Buffalo, a pretty tough defense so far this year. They've done a pretty good job of limiting opponents, as you would expect. Down a couple linebackers hasn't really affected them that much when they have been down players. They also played one game in huge wins, so that may have affected things just a little bit. But I think at this ownership number, 8% for Trevor Lawrence, I think I'll be a little bit above that. I like all three of the other quarterbacks clearly better than Trevor Lawrence. It's just a matter of, they're going to have to try to keep up with Buffalo. The fact that this is like almost a salary-less slate is what trips me up here, because it's like, man, he actually probably needs to outscore the other three quarterbacks on this slate. So it really is hard for me to prioritize Trevor Lawrence, but has at least theoretical rushing upside. Again, we haven't really seen it in the NFL all that much. He was a bit of a running quarterback in college. I keep hoping that it's going to come back at some point. He is the clear fourth priority for me, though. I do prefer the other three. So my order of preference among the quarterbacks would probably be Joe Burrow, followed by kind of toss up between Josh Allen and Jayden Daniels, and then Trevor Lawrence third. Looking at these ownership numbers, I would just be jamming in Joe Burrow. I might be, 50% Joe Burrow, bring Josh Allen down to 20%, bring Jayden Daniels up to 20% just slightly, and then 10% Trevor Lawrence. That's kind of the number that I think I'm probably going to shoot for on this slate. Don't know if there's anything else that really needs to be said about the quarterbacks. So let me pull up running backs. We'll move on to running backs next. Am I on the right slate here? Yes, I am. Okay. James Cook, Travis Etienne, the best projections on the slate, projected very similar to each other. And actually, let me pull up the data suite here. Makes it a little bit easier to talk about as we're going through the running backs. Great matchup for James Cook. High ownership number, kind of feels like it probably should be a high ownership number on James Cook. And actually, let me split this out. Give me 1 second. Everything was delayed a little bit coming in, so I didn't set everything completely up yet. Do that real quick. Haven't even poured my beer yet. I did grab one, but I have not poured it yet. All right, we'll start with looking at the Bills. So far on the year, James Cook, 30 of the team's 45 running back rushing attempts. Also running routes, 46% route participation, decent, not like really elite, but decent route participation. Only 4 targets on the year so far is kind of disappointing after we saw him more involved later in the year last year. In the passing game, he was targeted a bit late in the year. So I'm still kind of hopeful that that's going to come back. And maybe if Josh Allen is less inclined to run with his hand a little bit hurt, maybe he will start targeting James Cook a little bit more. I mean, it was hurt the last time. So I don't really think that's necessary, very, very likely to happen since it didn't happen last time. Good for you. Good for you, Sunflower. I need to do that more often, I think. Appreciate you taking your lunch to join the show, TB. All right. Yeah, so I think let's look at the ownership numbers on James Cook. 62% is high for me. So that is a spot where I'm going to get away from the James Cook ownership a little bit. Again, because the salaries are so loose, we probably need others to actually outscore him. But I think Zach Moss could pretty easily outscore him. Brian Robinson could pretty easily outscore him. There are some low-owned running backs that I will take a shot on also. So yeah, I think this is a spot where I'll probably be light on James Cook. That is just a little bit too high for me. It's not that great of a spot. I think it's a fine spot with Jacksonville. They've given up the 15th most DraftKings fantasy points to running backs so far this season. Again, small sample size, but kind of what we were expecting. I think it's kind of a middling defense. So it's not like it's the best possible matchup for James Cook. And he very easily could just not score the touchdowns. It could be Josh Allen scoring the touchdowns, could be passing touchdowns. We know that historically he's not super involved in the red zone, and we can actually, that's a good spot to look at the bell cow report, because we did see in week 1 he had an inside the 5. Am I in the right spot here? Russian bell cow. Maybe that's a different tool where I can look at the bell cow report. So let me pull that up real quickly also. But he did have an inside the 5 run in week 1. So maybe it does come back a little bit this year. I am sort of doubtful of that. I don't think he is going to be the running back at the goal line. Typically, I think Ray Davis is better suited for that. So I think long term we won't see James Cook get a ton of opportunities right at the goal line. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's see. Okay, so he has 100% so far on the year. Is that just one attempt? I don't know if there's actually a way to check how many attempts that is. It'll be easier maybe later on when we have more. Yep, I don't think we have any actual number on the number of attempts there, but I believe it's still just one inside the 5 run for running backs. Having a really good year. 20.9 fantasy points per game so far for James Cook this year, but just 12 expected fantasy points per game. So he's outperforming his expectations, what you would expect him to do with his role on the team. So with that in mind, at 62% ownership, I could just see this being a spot where he kind of regresses to more what you expect him to be. If he scores 12 fantasy points in this game, I think he could pretty easily be outscored by 2 other running backs. So it's not that I hate the play, it's just the ownership on James Cook a little bit much for me at 62%, when I think we have several other very viable running back plays on the slate who I think could pretty easily outscore him. So I'll be a little bit light there. Travis Etienne, let's take a look at the numbers there. Pretty good role for the Jags. The Bills have given up the second most DraftKings fantasy points per game to running backs so far this season. So that is worth noting, that they have been giving up a fair number of running backs to this point. I do still think, and they do have a couple of hurt linebackers, so that might be playing a factor. Maybe it does hold up until those linebackers come back. I'm not sure that I want to read that much into it, because I think they're a pretty good defense overall. But it is worth noting, Tank Bigsby in week 1 got 12 carries. So he actually matched same number of carries for Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby in week 1. And then in week 2, Tank Bigsby was hurt, didn't play a single snap. Now he's expected to come back tonight. So Tank Bigsby did play a pretty big role in week 1. It is worth noting ETN did outsnap him 33-18, and ETN was also the one involved in the passing game, ran 12 routes to Bigsby's 3. So I think that the fact that they split carries in week 1 is a little bit of an outlier. I think the actual usage would suggest that it is still pretty clear 1A ETN, 1B for Tank Bigsby. But at least notable that he was pretty involved. Tank Bigsby was pretty involved in week 1, and with him back this week, that could play a role. And I can show you that here. I've got it pulled up here. You sort here, you can kind of see the different usage here. Travis Etienne in week 1, 66% snap share up to 71% without Tank Bigsby there in week 2. The carries didn't really change, 12 up to 13 in week 2. The route participation pretty similar, up from 48% to 52.3%, but 7 targets on the year for Travis Etienne. Kind of what you expected coming in, that he would be involved in the passing game. So good to see that he's somewhat involved in the passing game here. I think he's pretty solid bet. Again, we can do basically whatever we want. So the fact that he's 200 more expensive than James Cook is not something that I am overly concerned about. Who do I like better? Pretty close for me. I think I lean towards ETN, I guess, just because slightly lower owned, but honestly, it's who's going to score the touchdown, I think, is what it comes down to here. I don't have a strong read. Both of them pretty highly owned. Hard to really take a stance here. Buffalo, though, again, giving up the second most DraftKings fantasy points to running backs so far on the season. Maybe that continues here. ETN, I think, still maintains that number 1 running back role with Tank Bigsby back, but it does kind of seem like they don't want to give him 25 carries so far. The fact that they're using Tank Bigsby there, I don't know. I don't feel that strongly about this. It's a tough one to break down. I think the ownership numbers are a little bit too high, at least on Cook, maybe on ETN also. Actually, this is a good spot where maybe it's worth looking around the industry to see if everybody has it about the same. I suspect that they will, but it's at least worth looking at. Yeah, looks like it's going to be Cook getting the majority of the ownership over ETN around the industry. And if that is the case, I guess it's such high ownership that it doesn't make that big of a difference for me. I think both are playable. I'm probably going to have a good amount of both. So I don't really want to make it sound like I'm fading either of these running backs completely, but probably I'll be closer to 50% on each, and then I'll mix in some of the lower owned running backs and pray, on a 2-game slate. That's kind of my approach. Is I mix in a lot of really lower owned players. So I guess I'm spending a lot of time on the top guys, and what it comes down to for me is usually I'm going to fade the chalk lightly and just have more lineups where I mix in the lower owned guys instead of playing both Cook and ETN. Maybe I'll have some lineups where I have Cook and then a lower owned guy, or ETN and then a lower owned guy. I end up with 40 to 50% of each of the chalky guys, probably closer to 50%, and then just mix in more of the lower owned guys than the field does. And we'll get to some of those guys that I like as we go. Zach Moss. So this is an interesting one. Zach Moss projecting for 14.25 fantasy points is 51% is the projected ownership on Zach Moss. And if we look at the numbers so far this year for the Bengals, Zach Moss, 75.2% snap share. Chase Brown, 24.8. 21 attempts, rushing attempts to 7 for Chase Brown. Running routes on 51% of dropbacks. Chase Brown, 21%, 5 targets. Chase Brown, 3. Like dominating the usage here for the Bengals. However, they said, I think they actually said this, at least indications were coming into the year, it was going to be a split backfield. That was kind of everybody's assumption coming into the year, was that it was going to be a split backfield between Zach Moss and Chase Brown. And that is not what we've seen at all so far. But I should note, Commanders giving up the 20th most DraftKings fantasy points per game to running back so far this season. But this is where it gets interesting to me. So offensive coordinator, and this is a hat tip to Coach Speak Index as usual, doing great work. They pointed out that offensive coordinator Dan Pitcher says on the Zach Moss and Chase Brown split as of last week, he said, any discrepancy you're seeing at this point is unintentional and the product of a small sample size. So we're seeing a pretty massive difference here. The offensive coordinator says it is the product of a small sample size, not intentional. Oh, my camera stopped working. I think I'm just going to give up on this camera and just use my computer's camera here. If I can figure out how to make that work. I don't know what's going on with my camera. Oh, I need to start it again. All right. It's not the best. It's not the best without the real camera working, but I don't think anybody cares that much about looking at me anyway. So I will continue on. Oh, and now I'm noticing this is a good reminder that I'm moved on to running backs already. All right. So to me, with the coach saying that he wants it to be more of an even split, that it's all incidental, it's a small sample size, that does make me a little bit hesitant on Zach Moss, and it does make me like Chase Brown a little bit more in a great matchup. So Chase Brown is the first like off the wall play that I do think I am going to lean into a little bit. Could be absolutely coach speak, just coach lying to us and they just want to use Zach Moss. Could be that there's absolutely nothing to it, but just said it this past week, might be on his mind that, everybody's noticing that we're using Zach Moss all the time and not really giving Chase Brown a chance. Maybe this is where they do start giving Chase Brown more of a chance. They are 0-2, not really having a lot of success. Why not make a little bit of a chance, a little bit of a change, go to Chase Brown a little bit. So with Chase Brown coming in at low ownership in a great matchup here, and I'll show you the Chase Brown ownership. Oh, okay. Well, that's come up. That has come up from the last time I looked at it. It was closer to 10%. 20% is, I still think, fine at 4,500. Man, I liked it. I did like it better when it was a lower number. Let me see if other places also have it higher now. Maybe the narrative really has taken effect. No, other places have it significantly lower on Chase Brown. Let me see. Looking around the industry real quick. Oops. All right, hang on. I don't know what is going on with this site. Anyway, I think that the Chase Brown ownership probably comes in sub 20%. Here's another place. Very, very, most places anticipating sub 10% ownership on Chase Brown. Ted says 12% where he's looking. So it's kind of all over the place. Antoine, you think it's going to be lower than 12%? I think 20% feels high. 12% I could see, because I don't think that, this is a hidden quote. I think people have seen the quote that they want to split it a little bit more. He is 4,500. Again, it's tough because it's not that tough to use all of your salary. So the $4,500 price tag doesn't actually do that much for you on this slate. You really need him to outscore the more expensive running backs. But it's a nice matchup with the Commanders. We know Chase Brown has that kind of ability to break a big play. We've seen him do it. So I'm interested in Chase Brown. Less interested if this 20% projected ownership number is right. I much prefer 10% to 20%. But I would be pretty surprised if it gets up to 20%. So I'm in on Chase Brown on this slate, hoping that he does not actually get the steam that we're projecting him for here. It also, again, makes me a little bit want to be a little bit light on Zach Moss. I think still has a great matchup, so it's not like I want to full fade Zach Moss, but maybe I bring down his number. He's projected for 51% ownership. Maybe I get closer to 40%, 30% on Zach Moss. Something like that is going to be my approach. Brian Robinson. I like Brian Robinson quite a bit. I'm going to be over the field on Brian Robinson. So that's another reason I'll be light on Zach Moss. I'll lean into the 35% owned Brian Robinson in what has been so far a complete run funnel defense for the Bengals. Seems like a pretty good spot here for Brian Robinson. And we can take a look at the numbers here. Actually, don't know if I've looked specifically for running back numbers. They've given up a lot of rushing yards overall. Let's see, DraftKings fantasy points per game to the running back position so far this year. Okay, not as high as I thought. Only 21 fantasy points per game to the running back position for the Commanders. But overall, giving up a lot of, the Bengals is what we're looking for, not the Commanders. The Bengals giving up 22.6 per game to the running back position. So a little bit more than average, or right around middling there in terms of fantasy points per game to the position, but giving up a lot of rush yards overall. I think Brian Robinson's role is pretty safe here. He's going to be splitting a bit with Austin Eckler, but if you look at the overall numbers on the season for Brian Robinson, pretty strong here. Total of 29 carries. Actually, let's look at the full number here. 29 carries already on the year. Not running a ton of routes. He has been targeted 6 times. So although Austin Eckler running more routes than Brian Robinson, pretty strong numbers there. I also saw a little quote from the Coach Week Index about the coaches have been impressed. Like they said, we didn't know that Brian Robinson was a good pass catcher. They've been impressed with Brian Robinson as a pass catcher. We saw it at least one game last year where he was pretty involved in the passing game. So I'm not dissuaded by these numbers here. I think it's pretty strong. I think it's bullish for Brian Robinson, the usage so far this year. I could see it his role in the passing game expanding also, and it is again just a run funnel defense. So all things point to me liking Brian Robinson, a little bit lower owned than the other RB1s on the slate. In a great matchup, I could see that role expand a little bit. So I do like Brian Robinson quite a bit. Austin Eckler, the other one, and we just saw he's only been targeted one more time than Brian Robinson on the year. The ownership number is pretty nice, so 16.5%. I do think he's maybe just involved enough that I think he could still put up a score. Honestly, like if you play Austin Eckler, you're kind of hoping that running backs in general, the scoring is low, and maybe he puts up 14 fantasy points, and that's enough to outscore, all except for one running back on the slate. I think that's kind of the hope with Austin Eckler, although I never saw Jawan Jennings putting up 40 plus fantasy points, whatever it was yesterday. So maybe Austin Eckler has more in his bag than I'm giving him credit for. But I think in general, when you play Austin Eckler, you're playing him with the hope that other running backs on the slate just don't do all that much. And maybe 14 fantasy points is enough to be in the winning lineup. And, just 10 carries, 7 targets so far on the year. This could be a game where they just run more, and maybe Austin Eckler gets more than 5 attempts is his average on the year. Maybe he gets more than that in this game if they just increase the size of that pie of the running backs they want to run a little bit more against a run funnel defense. So I do think Austin Eckler is a pretty strong play at ownership also. And again, looking at the numbers, he's 5,400, so kind of priced up. He's sort of a pay up to be contrarian play because he's not that far off from Brian Robinson. Brian Robinson has a clearly better role. Zach Moss, only 200 more than Austin Eckler, has a clearly better role. So it's sort of a pay up to be contrarian because he probably should be about the same price as Chase Brown as the RB2 on this team. But I'm still willing to bite to play some of these RB2s. I think that it is a strong way to play this. Sean asked 3 running backs tonight. It'll be a mix for me. There are a lot of pretty interesting wide receiver options as well that we will talk about. I think more likely I'm going to be playing a fourth receiver more often than a third running back on this slate because I just don't feel that strongly about the running backs. But I'll have some 3 running back builds. It's not something that I usually try to force. I kind of let the optimizers do it for me, decide for me how many running backs or wide receivers make up my flex. So yeah, it'll be a mix for me. But I think I'll probably end up with more wide receiver in the flex because I'm kind of fading the chalkier running backs here a bit. All right. Other running backs to talk about. I think we've talked about, Ray Davis. I guess we could look at Ray Davis and Ty Johnson, probably more interesting for the showdown slate, but I suppose we can at least pull up the bell cow report here. And by the way, this is if you have not watched my past streams, maybe you don't know that this is all Fantasy Points data suite that I'm using here. That's where I'm pulling up all these numbers. I think it's a fantastic tool. If you would like access to it, you can get it for 25% off using promo code Flannelman. This is what I use to do almost all of my research week over week. It is really, really great tool. Ray Davis, and maybe this is a spot where we also want to break it up game by game. So you can see here overall, Ray Davis, 12 carries. I think that is pretty strong for his first 2 NFL games. Ty Johnson, just 3 carries so far. Ty Johnson has the 3 targets on 28% route participation to Ray Davis, just 2 targets on 8% route participation. But as I recall, I think Ray Davis was actually more involved last game than he had been in the first game. So let's take a look here. Yeah, week 2, 14 snaps, had been just 6 in week 1. So 31% snap share in week 2 versus 10% in week 1, was more involved there, had 9 carries in that game. Wow. I watched that game and I did not realize he got up to 9 carries, 10% route participation. So you're kind of hoping, I think, for a goal line vulture for Ray Davis. I mean, 9 carries, maybe that's enough to be involved. Maybe we have a Braylon Allen situation brewing here where he's just too good to be kept off the field. So I do think you should probably consider at least Ray Davis. What's the numbers here? We got 4,300, 2% ownership. Similar thing to what I was saying with Austin Eckler, where it's just you're hoping that running back largely fails, and just like a touchdown and 50 yards is enough to, maybe a couple catches is enough to outscore other running backs on the slate. Also, obviously has some contingent upside. Now, the tough thing here is we do still have a split between Ray Davis and Ty Johnson. So even if something happened to James Cook, I don't think the contingent upside is quite as strong. Let's take a look at week 2 here. So Ray Davis, 14 snaps in week 2, Ty Johnson, 13. Only took 2 carries, but then ran routes on 26.7% of dropbacks. Man, Ty Johnson, this is one I was all in on him on the Showdown slate. He came a yard short of a long touchdown on this one target he saw. Was a near touchdown there. So that was sort of disappointing for me, but involved just enough in the passing game that I think he is interesting. Also does cut into the Ray Davis upside just a little bit, because I do think it'll be a split regardless of, like, if something happens to James Cook. I don't think it's very clearly just going to be Ray Davis's backfield. I think it would be still kind of a split, but you know what you're getting out of Ty Johnson, mostly involved in the pass game. Has 3 rushing attempts and 3 targets on the season. Decent route participation just given his snap share. You're kind of hoping for 3 catches and one of them he happens to score a touchdown. I think viable at low ownership, 1%, so slightly lower ownership than Ray Davis. Probably Ray Davis would be my slight preference there if they're going to be that close in ownership, just because I think he has the more likely touchdown upside at this point. The 9 carries is promising from last week, but it's it's close. You could see Ty Johnson just get a few more targets, be a little bit more involved in the passing game. Maybe if they get behind, maybe then Ty Johnson has a bigger role. But if I'm playing one of them, I think Ray Davis might slightly in there. And then Tank Bigsby, man, 5,000. That's a tough price for me to play on Tank Bigsby. Coming off of a shoulder injury, is expected to play here. To me, I don't think I'm going there with Tank Bigsby or Dearness Johnson. I think the price tag just a little bit much. Does still have the contingent upside. If something happens to Travis Etienne, then I'll feel pretty stupid for fading. But I think that there are other running backs that have clearer paths to a bigger role. 12 carries again in week 1, but I think that was a bit of an outlier. He's 5,000, so a little bit tougher to pay off. Maybe doesn't matter as much on this slate, again, because of the salary dynamics not being a huge issue. But I don't think that he is my favorite. Actually, let me just double. I don't think he was not very involved in the passing game in the one game that he did play. So just another reason. So it didn't play a single snap in week 2. In week 1, 12% route share. Didn't see a target. Did have 12 carries. So that is promising. Maybe I take it back. Because pricing is not really an issue, and he did have 12 carries, I'd consider him. I'll probably have some shares of Tank Bigsby. Not going to be a huge priority for me. Maybe I'll have a few percent of Tank Bigsby, again coming in at sub 1%. So if I might have 2 to 3% of Tank Bigsby. My priorities of the backup running backs we got the top four: James Cook, Travis Etienne, Zach Moss, Brian Robinson. But then of the backup running backs, my priorities would be Chase Brown 1, Austin Eckler 2, Ray Davis 3, I think Ty Johnson 4, and then Tank Bigsby. And I don't think I'm going to Dearness Johnson or anybody else at the running back position. And of the four starting running backs, my priorities would be relative to the field. Brian Robinson, I will be the most overweight to the field, but it's going to be more like I even out the exposures here, where I'm slightly end up with 50% Brian Robinson, 50% James Cook, 40% Travis Etienne, and 40% Zach Moss, something like that. So I'm bringing down kind of the ownership overall on the top guys. Brian Robinson, probably the one that I'm going to be the most overweight to the field on. But I think all of them going to be a big part of my lineups in general. Just have to mix and match where you're playing kind of the under-owned guys with the chalky guys at the running back position. All right. I think that's enough on the running backs. Actually, let me think. Are there any running backs from the same teams? I think you could play Zach Moss and Chase Brown together, particularly if you don't play them with the Bengals, with Joe Burrow in a stack. I think if you want to play it as like, okay, the entire field is going to play the Cincinnati passing attack, and you want to just say maybe they just do it on the ground. Maybe they don't need to pass all that much because they're just cooking them on the ground. I think that is a viable way to play if you want to play Zach Moss with Chase Brown. So I think if you were going to play two running backs from the same team, that would probably be the first place I go. The second place would be the Commanders. I think that is also a strong bet, where it's just the Bengals have been such a run funnel so far this year. If you want to play both Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler, I think that's a viable strategy. They're both low enough priced. Both of them, not extremely likely to hit. Again, though, we're looking for ways to be unique. I'll mention it here. All of my analysis, or most of my analysis, I'm giving you a lot of just stats, giving you the usage stats, the defense stats. That's obviously applicable to any type of contest you want to play. But when I'm giving my analysis of how I'm playing it, that's all for the largest field GPPs, where there's going to be hundreds of thousands of people in those GPPs. So if some of it sounds insane, like why would you play both of the running backs from the same team together? That's why, because in those large field GPPs, they're not going to be super highly owned. And that's a way that I will get different in those slates. I don't know that I would go that route if I were playing in a 100-man contest, a 200-man contest, but in a super large field GPP, I like to think about what are ways that something could hit that not a lot of the field is going to play, and that is how I'm going to play that slate. Is maybe a little bit of mixing in, both Washington running backs, both Cincinnati running backs, playing some of these lower owned kind of backup running backs in lineups where I'm hoping that the running backs in general on the slate just don't put up big scores, and you can stick with them with the lower owned and cheaper guys. So that's how I'm playing the slate at running back. Move on to wide receiver. And we kind of started talking about wide receiver already earlier when we were talking through quarterbacks and stacking. The Bengals, first place you got to start, I think, on this slate is the Bengals, just because this matchup is too damn good. I mean, the Commanders have just been cheat code. This is the Coors Field of the NFL. Playing passing games against this Commanders defense. Jamar Chase going to be mega owned. Also somehow only 7,500 here. Has not been great so far this year. I don't really care about that. I think we're going to see double-digit targets here for Jamar Chase, unless the game gets out of hand. I mean, maybe they score enough early on that the game gets out of hand and he's not used at all in the fourth quarter, and they just start running the ball more. But yeah, I think, okay, I was reading Sean's quote on saying he's been taking a lot of coverage lately. He's talking about Terry McLaurin there. Yeah, we'll talk about Terry McLaurin. Yeah, I talked about Zach Moss. I think is totally fine to play in a GPP. He's going to get a lot of ownership. It's a great matchup. I think totally a viable play in a GPP. To me, Jamar Chase, and actually I'll pull up the Road and Runners tool here so we can take a look at ownership, because it is quite high. I got to pull up all positions here. Actually, I'll go to just wide receivers for now. 78% projected ownership for Jamar Chase, pretty similar around the industry there. I think that's totally fine. Again, we talked about this a little bit earlier on. If you wanted to lock button Jamar Chase and get different elsewhere, I think that's a viable strategy. I don't think that's the strategy that I'm necessarily going to play, because certainly even Jamar Chase on this slate can fail. Even against the Commanders, it's possible for him to fail. But we also talked about earlier, he could put up 14 fantasy points, and that's enough to be in the winning lineup. It's a 2-game slate. You don't need 30 fantasy points, so he doesn't need, even at this salary at 7,500, you don't need 25 fantasy points. He could put up certainly like 18 fantasy points. I would expect to probably be enough for Jamar Chase. Not a sure thing though. Sean says, do I need to refresh not seeing the like button? Hopefully the like button is there for you guys. Yeah, if you have not already done so, please do hit the like button. It does help me out quite a bit. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, you can do that. Somebody, by the way, I think somebody a couple weeks ago said, we can't send you super chats if we want to. I think that I fixed that. So if you wanted to send a super chat, I do a pretty good job of responding to a lot of things in chat. I try to, but if you want to make sure I see it, or you just want to send a super chat, I think that I have at least enabled it now. For whatever reason, YouTube had given me issues with my monetization. I'm trying to keep that to just that with my monetization, not doing any kind of ads or anything on the show, just trying to keep it to super chats. And of course I have affiliate deals here with Roto Grinders, with fantasy points, all of that. Okay. So wide receivers, I think 78% on Jamar Chase could be, and you can see opto percentage here. The estimated probability the player will appear in the winning lineup based on the simulation trials. Love that. Look at that. So we have Jamar Chase under-owned at 78%. I think this is new. I don't think this has been here in the past. I love that they added this. So we can see, just based on the sims here at Roto Grinders, 78%, a little bit light on Jamar Chase. He's going to be a big part of my lineups. I don't see myself really trying to get too different from the field on Jamar Chase. As you can see here, projects 8 points better than any other receiver on the slate. The best argument for fading him, I don't think would be that he just doesn't score at all. I think it would be maybe there are 3-4 other wide receivers who put up 20 plus fantasy points, and Jamar Chase just puts up 16. I think that's what you're hoping for if you're fading for Jamar Chase. Obviously, you can get hurt like that. That can happen anytime. Anybody can get hurt on a given slate. It's hard to really want to play. Once you get up to like 95% ownership, then I start thinking, all right, here maybe I will start fading, hoping, not hoping for a stub toe, that kind of thing. All right, let's see. Jamar Chase, going to be playing a lot of. Don't really think I need to say that much more. Again, highest neutral pass rate in the entire NFL in the nuts matchup. One of the best receivers in the NFL. Everything, wheels up for Jamar Chase. T. Higgins, first game back from injury. Hard to know exactly what his usage is going to look like. He said in interviews this week that he was 100%. Wasn't all that convincing to me. I watched the interview where he said that. It sounded like, I don't know. I wasn't totally sold. It wasn't like an totally optimistic, like 100%. I'm ready to go. It was more like, 100%. Kind of shrugging to me. So I wasn't totally sure to what extent I buy it, but I think that's probably still a reasonable expectation that T. Higgins is going to be pretty close to 100% here. I don't think we're going to get a repeat of last year or 2 years ago where T. Higgins was active. We weren't sure if he was going to be active, and then he was, and then he didn't play at all. That was super painful for me. I don't think we're going to get that on this slate. I think he's going to play. I think he's going to be nearly 100% of what we would expect from T. Higgins. Steps into that wide receiver 2 role. Great game to come back for T. Higgins with the Commanders. Best possible matchup. Projecting here for 13 fantasy points, 5,900, 39% ownership seems fair. Is coming back from a hamstring injury, so there's always the risk of re-aggravation there that you could factor that in if you want to with T. Higgins, but at that level of ownership, I think I'm just going to play it. I'll probably be about with the field, maybe even above weight to the field on 39%. Again, I'm leaning into the Bengals stacks quite a bit. Looks a little bit over-owned here, according to this number here. Optimal 37% of the time in the RG Sims. But I think that also factors in a little bit of, I think projections are assuming a little bit of a limitation on T Higgins, which I think is fair. But yeah, I'm Ash still scares me. Yeah, me too. I hated that the decoy. Yeah, maybe played a couple plays as a decoy and then was out. I forget exactly how it went down, but that was just painful game. Yeah, I think this number for me, I'm going to be a little bit overweight there. And then the other one, I'll keep going just on the Bengals. I'll go team by team here. Andre Yoshevas, to me, I really like the play at 9%. Was actually, in my opinion, a little bit of a disappointment in the games without T. Higgins as the wide receiver too. I don't really feel like he stepped up. He did have a game with 2 touchdowns. So when you see that, okay, he had 2 touchdowns in a game. How could he possibly have been a disappointment? But he had, depending where you look, 33 or 34 total yards on 10 targets in those 2 games. To me, kind of ran hot with touchdowns, was not all that impressive outside of the touchdowns. But I still think those were tough matchups. It was the Chiefs and the Patriots in the first 2 weeks. The Patriots just got crushed, but I think we can think of them as being, pretty good defenses in general. Now he does obviously get a matchup upgrade with the Commanders. A lot more attention now going to Chase and Higgins. If we just think that he plays that Tyler Boyd role, which I think is a reasonable assumption that Andre Yoshevas can play the Tyler Boyd role, you'd see 3 or 4 blow up games per year for Tyler Boyd when he was playing as that wide receiver 3. I think it could happen here. I think this is a good matchup for Andre Yoshevas. And when I just see pretty good, I think he's a pretty good receiver in an elite offense that's going to be scoring a lot in a great matchup. Coming in at 9% ownership, I expect him to be out there. I don't think I'm going to any of the other tertiary receivers. I don't think I'm going to Trenton Irwin or anybody like that because I don't think you need to. Because Andre Yoshevas is expected to be sub 10% owned, I'll just go there to the guy that I think is going to be out there a significant amount of the time. So Andre Yoshevas, the only other Bengals wide receiver that I have interest in. I don't think I'm going to Jermaine Burton, Trenton Irwin, anybody else, because this is low enough ownership for me that on a 2-game slate, I am going to lean into that a bit with Andre Yoshevas. And then outside of the Bengals, it's a tough one. This is a pretty tough slate in general for wide receivers because probably they're going to be wide receivers who hit from the Bills, from the Jaguars. It's just so unpredictable. That's one of the nice things about the Bengals is it's pretty predictable where the targets are going in general. They want to feed Chase, they want to feed Higgins, Yoshevas, Gesicki. The tight ends will be kind of more secondary options, tertiary options for the Bengals. Whereas the other teams, it's like don't really feel that great about any of the receiving options, and we'll get through them here a little bit. Yeah, I'll definitely have a good amount of Chase Higgins lineups. I'll have a good amount of Chase Yoshevas lineups. One I talked about early on, that one way to play these to get a little bit different from the field is just leaning into the mega stack. I think you could even do all 3 of the Bengals receivers in the same lineup is one way to get a bit different, and then maybe bring it back with a Brian Robinson or something like that in a Burrow stack. If I have all 3, probably going to include Burrow in that stack also. But yeah, definitely going to have some of that. Well, let's break it down. Let's take a look at these. We'll start with the Buffalo receivers, then we'll do the Jaguars, then we can talk a little bit about the Commanders receivers. So I'll pull up I don't have advanced receiving up yet, looks like. So let me pull that up real quick. And then we'll walk through it a little bit. And I'll take a sip of my beer while I'm loading this stuff. I'm drinking a pistachio cream ale. If any of you, I think it's a Minnesota brewery. Indeed Brewing pistachio cream ale, pretty good. It's interesting. All right, so I'm going to split it up for. I guess I'll do a game by game so we can see where things are trending. If anything changed week 1 to week 2, and then just look at the overall numbers also. And again, we'll start with the Bills. I'll split this off by week and by opponent so we can get a game log here. I think it's kind of an interesting one to break down. All right, so we'll do that. All right, so I'll start with Curtis Samuel because I think he is probably the one that's the most up in the air. I think coming into the year, we thought Curtis Samuel was going to be a starting receiver for this team. I think that was, an assumption that basically everybody made all summer. So far, 30% and 40% route participation for Curtis Samuel. So not great from that perspective. 2 targets in each of the first 2 games. I think it's worth noting that he was dealing with a turf toe injury coming into the year. And they asked Sean McDermott, how much does that play a role? The turf toe injury, is that the reason that he's being limited? And he sort of downplayed it. He kind of said, we're gonna have a rotation, different guys are gonna work in. Um, so it's possible that he really is just not going to be a full-time starting receiver. It's possible that he really is just, this is what he is. He's a 30 to 40% route participation guy, not a starting receiver. Can't expect more than that. I'm not sure though. I think that we don't have enough information to know for sure because we had week 1, just coming in, had the turf toe injury, as expected, pretty limited. There was some indications that maybe he was going to be limited coming into week 1. And then week 2 was just 4 days later. It was a Sunday game followed by a Thursday game. And also, maybe he was limited in the Sunday game because they knew they had another game in 4 days. He's recovering from an injury. You don't really want to run him out there full route participation. So I think there's at least some possibility that Curtis Samuel does take a big step up in terms of volume today. Certainly not something I feel overly confident in. Again, they asked the coaches about it. The coaches didn't say that. They didn't say like, yeah, he's limited by a turf toe injury. We're bringing him along. He'll get more involved. They said, yeah, we've got a lot of guys. We'll mix them in. It was kind of a non-committal response to what they want to do with Curtis Samuel. Actually, let me see if I can find it real quick. I'm just going to look in the Coach Speak Index Discord to see if they have the direct quote, because to me it was a pretty non-committal, not super promising about like oh yeah, here's what it was. So this is on September 9th. Sean McDermott asked about the turf toe injury. He was asked on whether wide receiver Curtis Samuel's turf toe played into his limited snaps. So this was after week 1. He said, yeah, just overall how the game was flowing. So good to get guys involved and multiple guys involved. I thought Curtis did a good job. So I don't know. To me, that was sort of non-committal. Didn't make it sound like necessarily it was because of the turf toe that he wasn't playing a bigger role. But I think it's at least a possibility that he has not played a lot because he's recovering from this turf toe injury, and then just 4 days later, the second game. Now they've had a full week and a half for him to recover. So I wouldn't be that surprised to see Curtis Samuel take on a bigger role than he did in weeks 1 and week 2. And where do we have the ownership here on Curtis Samuel? Sort by fantasy points. 5%. To me, that's a number. Again, this is on these short slates. I like to get a little bit different. I mix in a lot of 5% players that I think are interesting. I'll play them at 15%. Like I'm not getting crazy overboard, but then I end up a little bit lighter on the chalky guys, a little bit more of the less chalky guys. I think this is a spot where I might get a little bit chalkier where I might get a little bit different by playing Curtis Samuel where he's coming in at 5% ownership, and he could play a bigger role. I don't feel, again, I'm not super confident that that is the case. The coaches didn't really indicate that that is the case, but I think it sort of would make sense if he was, still recovering from a turf toe injury. Maybe bring him along slowly for the, 2 games that are 4 days apart, and then really let him rest for a week and a half, maybe get him more involved this week. So if they do, if their intention is to get Curtis Samuel more involved, to me, it would make sense for them for this to be a game where you really do see that jump. And I'm at 5% ownership on a 2-game slate. That's where I'm willing to just make the bet. Hey, maybe this is the game where Curtis Samuel gets more usage, runs more routes. And even if he doesn't, he can still pay off his price tag. He's just 4,400. If he just plays the 40% route participation that he had in week 2, you could see him score a touchdown and pay off. So you have multiple outs, but I think that there is like big upside in the case that he does get up to, what if he plays 70% of the snaps and gets into that same rotation, kind of on the same level as a Keon Coleman, or I guess secondary Khalil Shakir, kind of on that number. To me, that would be a great spot where the field is kind of overlooking him based on what we've seen from him so far. So I do have interest in in Curtis Samuel. Khalil Shakir coming in has the highest projection of the Bills receivers, 33% projected ownership, and we'll bring that up here also. Pretty solid roll for the Bills so far. 70% rep participation in each game so far. Exactly 70%. 5 targets in week 2, 3 targets in week 1. Pretty strong projectable roll there for Khalil Shakir. Seems like a totally fine play to me. I think we're sort of just in the dark a little bit on the Bills receivers in general. It is sort of tough. Wait, it's week 3. Are you responding to me? I don't know, or maybe responding to somebody else. Yeah. So I 33% feels a little bit high to me. If he's going to be the highest owned of the Bills receivers, what do we have? Khalil Shakir at 33%. Keon Coleman at 26%, Brian Thomas at 32%. I will probably be more inclined to go to the other Bills receivers a little bit more, but doesn't seem that bad to me. 33% to me is just a little bit high. I'll probably play 20 to 25% Khalil Shakir. Actually, if you look at this number, they have him this a little bit light in terms of optimal numbers. Again, I think that there's early enough in the year, we have a little bit of input volatility in these numbers. So I'm sort of trusting my instincts a little bit more than the numbers, probably more than I should trust my instincts, but that is the way I'm playing it for large field GPPs. I'll probably be a little bit light on Khalil Shakir. Keon Coleman is also very interesting to me. I think I actually prefer Keon Coleman because I think he has more of that big play upside. Just looking at his ADOT in week 2, 22 ADOT in week 2. I mean, that's one target. That's why he has that major ADOT. Not going to read too much into that, but I think he has the ability to make big plays, has that, still kind of has that rookie shine on him where maybe he's just really good and we just don't really know yet. Looked really promising in week 1, saw 5 targets, 86.7% route participation, leads the team in route participation down to 80% in week 2. I'm not concerned about that. 6 targets on the year. I like it at low ownership. I'm willing to go back to the Keon Coleman well. So maybe I kind of even out the exposures there between Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman would be kind of my target numbers for each of them. We'll see how perfect I am at actually doing it, but that would be my goal, would be to kind of even out those ownership numbers a little bit. Outside of those two, so we talked about Curtis Samuel, Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir. Mac Hollins, pretty interesting to me. This is one where I think Mac Hollins and Curtis Samuel could, in terms of just how they're playing the wide receiver rotation, if we do see Curtis Samuel play more, we could see Mac Hollins take a little bit of a step back. If we get back to that kind of rotation that we're expecting coming in, I could see Mac Hollins take a little bit of a step back. So but with that said, I like Mac Hollins. I don't know if I'll play him with Curtis Samuel. I like both of them. I'll be overweight to both of them, but I don't know that I would play both of them in the same lineup. And that might be getting too cute anyway, just given that they're both coming in at very low ownership. We have Curtis Samuel coming in at 5%. We have Mac Hollins coming in at 2.5%. So I think totally reasonable. If you want to set a rule to not have them in the same lineup, that might be just playing too much anyway. I think you could. I think it's possible for both of them to hit in the same lineup. So if in a 150 set, I probably wouldn't set that rule. But if you're just playing, hand building one lineup, I think I would prefer to not have them in the same lineup. If I'm just choosing one of them. But Mac Hollins, I think 65% route participation in week 2. Yeah, 65%. No, that's 13 total routes. They didn't run a ton of routes in that game against Miami, but pretty promising. Did not see a target in that game. Had 2 targets in week 1. I think somebody just said, he had a touchdown in week 1. That's always promising. He was also, it was an end zone target. So they did target him in the end zone. Is that just one first read target on the year for Mac Hollins? I think it's only 3 targets total. So, two targets total. So one of them a first read target. Yeah, not great usage there, but 65% route participation rate. If that does hold on a very good Bills offense, I would be overweight to. I'm going to be overweight to 2.5% Mac Hollins. Again, not trying to get, I'm not trying to play 50% Mac Hollins. Maybe I'll play 10, 15% Mac Hollins will be kind of my goal. you don't even necessarily need to go. If you want to play 1 in 20 lineups, get to 5% Matt Collins. I think that's a totally reasonable amount. I think it's, it's a dart throw kind of bet. These are the bets that I like to make on 2-game slates. I mix in kind of these random guys because they typically, in my experience, if you play like afternoon only slates, you often see people go low. So some like really viable player. It's actually, in some ways, I like that. I like this better than Showdown because you really do see players just get completely squeezed out that are totally viable. And I think we have some of those on the slate. And I think Curtis Samuel, Matt Collins, to me, are two of the better totally viable plays. We don't really know how things are going to shake out in terms of route participation in this game, but I'm willing to take some shots on both of them. Not playing any MVS. We'll talk about tight ends when we get to tight ends. So that does it for the Bills. Now the Jaguars, also pretty interesting. Again, Brenton Strange we'll talk about once we get to tight ends. I'll start by looking at the ownership. Let me refresh again because it looks like some of these numbers have maybe changed. Wide receivers. Christian Kirk is coming in at the most ownership here, which I think he probably should. Has not done a ton so far this year. We kind of had the expectation that he was going to be the wide receiver 1 on the team. Hasn't done a ton. He has 7 total targets on the year. A lot of air yards here. I think he's a solid enough option. 80% route participation in both games so far this year. Just hasn't really gotten going yet, but he's had the best career of these receivers. So Christian Kirk, I still think is probably the best receiver on the Jags. The ownership is there though. I was hoping the ownership would be a little bit lower than we are seeing here. This might be a spot where I'm just playing it right with the field on Christian Kirk. 33% for a player that hasn't really done much this year so far. This is 2024 DFS for you. People get ahead of this stuff. They don't wait for a player to hit before they play him, and we're seeing that with Christian Kirk. I think he's totally fine at that number. Brian Thomas, similar number. I mean, you can see this is a good example of exactly what we're looking at with the Jags pass catchers, is that they're all coming in within 1.5% ownership of each other. That's so tough to break it down because the ownership is pretty even on all of them. You look at the usage so far this year. Brian Thomas, 75% route participation, 4 targets per game. Christian Kirk has 8 targets total for Brian Thomas, 7 for Christian Kirk, running a little bit more routes, 80% routes. Then you've got Gabe Davis, who was actually up to 10 targets. He had 7 targets in week 2, so that's pretty promising usage for Gabe Davis in week 2. Around 85% route participation. It's tough. It is tough to figure out how to break these guys down. You might see Gabe Davis maybe a little bit less involved after maybe not the best game. Maybe you want to play the revenge game narrative with Gabe Davis against the Bills, against his former team. Maybe they just want to get him a touchdown here. Maybe they force it to him a little bit. It'll be in this show, Sean. I'll finish talking through the 2-game slate, then we'll go over Showdown for a bit. I'm gonna try to be done by 7 Eastern time so I can get to all of my lineups. Take a little time here, but yeah, I'll be doing Showdown immediately after I'm done breaking down this slate. But the hard truth is that I don't really have a great feel on the Jaguars receivers. I think that the field is getting it about right. I think all these guys should be around 30 to 33% owned. That's exactly where they are. Gabe Davis only 4,200 and does have the most targets on the team, the highest route participation. So I guess Gabe Davis would probably be my favorite of the group. We know that he has the ability to break a slate, but I don't know. None of them are totally standing out to me. You can kind of make a strong case for any of them. I think Christian Kirk, again, came into the year as the expected wide receiver 1, has done the most in his career so far. I guess Gabe Davis, you can make an argument that Gabe Davis has. Brian Thomas, kind of the exciting rookie, I think could be a really good player. I think at some point he could break out. Maybe it happens this week. It's really, really hard for me to want to give a strong opinion on these Jaguars receivers. I'm going to be playing them all about even with the field. I think this is a pick your favorite kind of spot and hope for the best, because if the usage we've seen continues, it's really just who scores a touchdown, and I think all three are very capable of scoring the touchdown, or who gets 7-8 catches. I think all three are capable. Christian Kirk probably the most likely to do it through PPR scamming us. So maybe there's a point in favor of Christian Kirk. But it is tough. I'm not going to try to give some hot take here. I think they're all getting around the same ownership, and I think that seems totally reasonable to me. Finally, we have the Commanders. Terry McLaurin at 40% projected ownership, and we do see he's optimal more frequently than that. It scares me. The 40% ownership does scare me on Terry McLaurin just a little bit, because I think it's going to be low passing volume for the Commanders. Looking at the usage rates so far, let me see. I have that written down here, so let me pull that up. What the usage has been so far for Jayden Daniels. Oh, never mind. They have a ninth in the NFL in neutral pass rate, so they just have not run that many plays, I guess. So more passing than I realized for the Commanders. So that doesn't really hold up the argument that maybe they don't pass the ball as much. But Terry McLaurin, I think he has 12 targets on the year. He is obviously leading the team. That's all promising. Pull it up here first in the overall for the year. Terry McLaurin leads the team in route participation, 77.5%. 12 targets on the year. At some point, you do expect these guys to hit. Terry McLaurin, I still think I like for the total season. Would hope for a little bit of an ownership discount here, because they haven't really hit together yet. We're not getting any kind of ownership discount. Again, the field getting ahead of it with Terry McLaurin. Cincinnati, again, kind of a run funnel defense to this point, which is why the 40% ownership scares me a little bit. But he is the clear focal point of this passing game. 40%. Again, you can see here, optimal more frequently than that. I can't really argue with that. I think that feels about right. I think if we know any receiver, I think there's less volatility in the Commanders than the Jaguars, the Bills, because we know that for the Commanders, Terry McLaurin is just the wide receiver one. So I do think 40% feels totally fair to me on Terry McLaurin. Hard to take a big stance there. I also think we do have some interesting potential options down the line for the Commanders. We have somebody already brought up Luke McCaffrey in chat. We'll walk through the last game. I think also Noah Brown and Diami Brown can both be at least considered here. But let's pull up the receiving log for the past two games here. All right, so if we sort by, we've got it sorted by name. Okay. Diami Brown up from 42% route participation in week 1 to 55% in route 2. Week 2 hasn't really done a ton. He saw 0 targets in week 1, 4 targets in week 2. He caught 2 of them for 17 yards. So has not really done much at all. But I think he was kind of the presumptive wide receiver 2 coming into the year. We don't really see anybody else separating in terms of route participation. Obviously, we've got Terry McLaurin, Zach Ertz, but outside of Terry McLaurin and Zach Ertz, really a tough wide receiver core to break down in general. We saw Olamide Zaccheaus lose some touches in week 2, so I don't think he is, or some routes in week 2. He's not going to be a big thing for me, but I think that I will consider Diami Brown at very, very low ownership. Where do we have that? Diami Brown at 1.5% projected ownership at 3,200. I like that. I think for a wide receiver 2, he is capable of just breaking off a big play and looking pretty good, looking like the player that you need in your lineup. So I think that is, again, a spot where maybe I get up to 8% ownership or 5% ownership, just above 1.5%. I think that's a little bit light. Oh yeah, maybe I don't advertise enough. I've been trying a little bit. Yeah, I've got my own channel here. I'm doing Showdown stuff 3 days a week on this channel. Glad you found it. Thanks for joining us, Blackjack Lloyd. Diami Brown, I like it. I think going to be if he's just running 55% of the routes again, I think that's pretty strong. Noah Brown is a tough one for me because you just played week 2, his first game, and was not super involved. 18% route participation. Did see 3 targets on those 18% routes. So the target share for the routes that he actually ran, pretty promising for Noah Brown. Again, I'm going to go back to the Coach Speak index here for the quotes on Noah Brown because I thought it was sort of interesting. It made it sound to me like they maybe want to get him more involved over time. I don't know if they're there yet. Cliff Kingsbury quote: Noah Brown is explosive and physical. You feel his presence on the field, the run game, and in the pass game. Will continue to expand his role, and we feel like we have a crowded room there. So at least they're saying that they're going to expand the role for Noah Brown. Had some great games last year for the Texans. Maybe it's true, but again, we're going to continue to expand his role. Doesn't scream to me like we're going to give him 80% next week. It's okay. Maybe he grows. Maybe the role grows a little bit next week, and then continues to grow throughout the year. Again, it's sometimes hard to interpret coach speak because I think sometimes the coaches themselves don't really know what they mean with their quotes. But I think it's at least an interesting play. I wouldn't go as far as Tokyo Swan and say I think 3.3K Noah Brown is a must play. Again, 18% route participation last week. They're going to continue to expand his role. I wouldn't go so far as to call him a must play, but I do think that he is an interesting contrarian play that not a lot of people are going to get to, and we can look at the ownership there on Noah Brown. 3% projected ownership seems like a number I want to get on top of. Again, probably 10% would be like probably the most I get to on Noah Brown. I don't think I'm getting higher than that number, but I do think he is a player that I'm going to mix in. So we do have some nice options on the Commanders. I don't think I'm going to anybody else on the Commanders. I think it's just Terry McLaurin, the kind of obvious one, the focal point of the offense beyond Terry. We haven't talked about Luke McCaffrey. So this one, let me know if you're in chat and you think that I'm missing something here. Let me know because I don't understand what happened here. Week 1, 60.6% route participation. After the game, the coach said, oh, we're gonna. I think it's gonna go like this. He did like the airplane taking off. I think he's just gonna the role is gonna continue to expand for Luke McCaffrey. Some of the same coach speak for. We want to get him more involved. I think he's gonna really take off. And then they didn't play him. They lowered his role in week 2. So from 60.6% down to 39.5%, 0 targets in week 2. Doesn't make any sense to me after the coaches come out and say that he's going to have a bigger role. He's going to take off like an airplane, like all of that. And to me, it made sense. Like, it was like, yeah, this is a guy that, a lot of people are talking about him. This is Scott has told me that the guy who like runs the college version of the Pro Bowl, I forget what it's called, but college pro day, I don't know, was talked about him, told Scott multiple times, Luke McCaffrey is going to be this year's Puka Nacua. And I heard that from Derek Brown told me the same thing. He replaces Luke McCaffrey is going to be this year's Puka Nacua. People are saying it, that he's going to have this great year. After week 1, I was excited. 60.6% route participation. The coach says we want to get him more involved. Going to be an airplane taking off. And then week 2, just not involved at all. I don't think there was any kind of injury or anything. We also saw, I think week 1, he was not totally limited to the slot. Still, I guess mostly 85% slot participation, 15% out wide, 80% in week 2, down to 20% out wide. So he's mostly just playing in the slot. Maybe he takes on more of a role. Who else was playing the slot in week 2? I mean, Olamide Zacchaeus played less in the slot. Yeah, I don't know. I can't make anything out of this. I guess Ben Sinnott played more. Didn't play in week 1. Played a little bit in week 2. Sinnott, another one that the coaches talked about as his role is going to expand throughout the year. So we're just hearing too much for the Commanders. The Commanders coaches just telling us every single player the role is going to expand throughout the year. So this is Kingsbury on the tight end room again from Coach Peak Index. Zach Ertz is a savvy veteran in the pass game that continues to get open, continues to present to a young quarterback. So sounds bullish on Zach Ertz. Then he says, I think Ben Sinnott's the one who's going to continue to really come on, and we're going to expand his role as the season goes on and the game slows down for him. So everybody's role on this Commanders team is expanding clearly. I maybe we just can't trust the coach speak here. I guess, well, this is where the coach speak index comes in handy. I'll have to read through what his takeaway on how trustworthy Cliff Kingsbury is. But they talk about everybody's role expanding. I think Terry McLaurin, the one we can definitely trust. My guess is that Diami Brown continues to be 50-ish, maybe more percent route participation. So he feels the second safest to me. And then you could take dart throws. I think dart throw on Noah Brown or Luke McCaffrey. I think it's all viable. I think that they're all, it's hard to interpret what the coaches are telling us. Because again, I'm not sure they know what they think, but Luke McCaffrey, a little bit higher ownership. So if he's going to be the one that's getting the most ownership, I think Diami Brown, my second favorite after Terry McLaurin, followed by maybe Luke McCaffrey and then Noah Brown. I think would probably be the order. Pretty close between those last two. But I could see, Luke McCaffrey just maybe it's a fluky game where he didn't play as much. I'm getting away from. I'm not playing Olamide Zacchaeus. If he bites me, he bites me. That's too little playing time in week 2 for me for Zacchaeus. Okay, I think that's all the receivers that I want to talk about. Yeah, I think that is. So we'll move on to tight ends. Dalton Kincaid, the best projected on the slate by quite a bit, has the highest ownership projection by quite a bit also. I think the smart money in general is going to be fading it a little bit. Do I need to expand this? Let's see. So RotoGrinders has the opto at 45%. So they actually have Dalton Kincaid a little bit under-owned here. So that is notable to me that they have him a little bit under-owned. Looking at the numbers, that was not the sense that I got on Kincaid. To me, it's a little bit strong on Kincaid with 5 total targets so far on the year. No, 3 total targets. So wait, 5 total targets on the year so far. Route participation, 80% week 1, 70% week 2. I'm not going to read too much into the change in route participation. But I clearly can fail because he has not really done that much so far this season. Just 5 targets, pretty easy for it to fail. So this is chalk that I am inclined to fade at least somewhat. Maybe I get to 30% Kincaid, so I'm not completely dead if he does go off, because I do think he is going to be the chalkiest. It's so easy to pay up, and he's the one that, like, people think of it as this guy is a stud, right? Like they think this is a star tight end. If I have the salary, why would I not pay up for the star tight end? I think it would be pretty easy for somebody else to outscore him here. That is true. Anthony says in game 2, Kincaid didn't play 2 drives due to concussion protocol. Yeah, that is a good note from Anthony. So maybe it would have been right around that 80% route participation again, which very strong. But we do have several other tight ends on this slate. Well, let's see, Brenton Strange. I guess the Cincinnati guys, you can kind of argue against them having that kind of role. Zach Ertz. So you have, at least 2 other tight ends who are going to have close to the same kind of route participation. Now, if you just want to bet on that Buffalo offense, like I don't think he's a bad play. Clearly, he is, according to the RG Opto, actually a little bit under owned at 42%. To me, if I'm eating the chase chalk, like I just don't think you want to play all of the chalk together. So you probably don't want to play ETN with James Cook, with Jamar Chase, with Dalton Kincaid, with T. Higgins, and just jam all of the chalk. And to me, this is a place where I think I'll probably get a little bit different. So I'm not eating all of the chalk, because I do think Brenton Strange, sort of an interesting case here. So Kincaid, hopefully I don't need to go too much more into it. I think we kind of know he was better fantasy wise last year when Dawson Knox was out. I don't know why that should play much of a role when he's running 80% of the routes, but that was the case last year. I think he's certainly got the upside for 5 catches and a touchdown and to absolutely break the slate. So I don't want to like full fade Kincaid, but has not shown it yet this year. I think they're pretty spread out offense. To me, it's going to be a light fade there. Brenton Strange, pretty interesting to me. Last week, filling in for Evan Ingram, we saw a pretty solid game here for Brenton Strange. 7 targets in that game, 118 air yards. Was just, 67% route participation. The numbers are great for Brenton Strange. Kind of had the exact same usage as Evan Ingram. I think he's a talented pass catching tight end. All right, Sean getting away from it. He says, yeah, I think that's fine if you want to get away from it. If you just want to get into Dalton Kincaid, play some of the other tight ends, I think that's totally fine. But the price is pretty low for a guy who really just played the Evan Ingram role last week. And Evan Ingram, again, led all tight ends, I want to say, in targets last year, maybe receptions also. One of those stats. He was very involved in this offense. So 7 targets for Brenton Strange in week 1, or in the last game with Evan Ingram out. To me, that's like, that might be sustainable. Maybe he just is going to be a focal point of this offense. Coming in at just 23% ownership, 2.7K. I like it. I think that's a spot where I might be probably pretty close. To be honest, I don't think I'm going to be too far off the field from Strange. I think seeing Zach Ertz at 12% ownership, that's where I'm probably more inclined. If I'm getting away from what the field is doing, I'm probably going to stick to about even on Strange, maybe a little bit light on Dalton Kincaid, and then bring up my Zach Ertz exposure. Because again, the coach speak is positive. You look at the actual numbers for Ertz. He is actually, I'll pull up the full season game log. It's been very consistent for Zach Ertz that he is second on the team in route participation at 72%, has 8 targets on the year, has caught 7 of them. No reason to not continue to go to Zach Ertz. Yeah, he's dusty, but if he's going to get those targets, I'll take him. I'll take it. So I do like Zach Ertz. I think he's about as good a bet as anybody to score a touchdown here. Again, a bit of a run funnel there, but I think maybe just some short passes to Zach Ertz. Any thoughts on playing double tight end? Man, it's tough. I guess it's easier than a main slate. Like, and I'll play double tight end sometimes on main slates. Here, the problem is, because salary is so loose, you really need like that second tight end to outscore everybody else. And we don't really have multiple star tight ends. It'll probably go lower owned than it should. So I'll say that. Like, I do think not many people are going to have 2 tight ends in their lineups, and we do have 3 tight ends on the slate that are running greater than 70% route participation in Kincaid, Strange, and who was the third one? Oh, and Ertz. So it's viable. It'll be probably a little bit underrepresented by the field. It's obviously not all that likely to hit because we do have several wide receivers who are similar plays. But honestly, there's not that much separating like the rest of the Jaguars receivers from Brenton Strange. Maybe more talented, but as far as target share goes, last week we saw 7 targets go to Brenton Strange. Maybe Zach Ertz scores a touchdown. He could outscore, all the kind of secondary receivers also. So I don't totally hate the idea. Definitely not something I'm forcing in, because you can go to a third running back there. You can go to a fourth, pretty good receiving option. So I don't have strong feelings. I don't have strong negative feelings about it. I don't have all that strong of positive feelings about it either. Yeah, well, I'll get to Eric All also. Okay, so. So we have the 3, getting reasonable route participation in Dalton Kincaid and Brenton Strange and Zach Ertz, all pretty involved. Zach Ertz being the lowest owned makes me like him. I think this could be just a really low scoring tight end slate where Zach Ertz puts up 10 fantasy points, and that is the leading scoring tight end on the slate. So 12% ownership for a tight end who is involved. And of course, he could have 6 receptions and a touchdown, put up 15 fantasy points, and be awesome. So I think that's a good ownership number on Zach Ertz. The Bengals guys. So the Bengals guys are pretty interesting in general. Mike Gesicki, 19.5% projected ownership. Then we have Drew Sample, just under 4% ownership. Eric All at 0.5% ownership. I do think that is pretty interesting. Those numbers on the Bengals receivers. So we had in week 1, we had Tanner Hudson available, and Tanner Hudson in week 1, 20% route share, was targeted 3 times. Pretty good pass catching receiver. He was out in week 2, going to be out again today. I think he was already ruled out. So Tanner Hudson taken out of the equation. We saw in week 2, Eric All moved up from 9% route participation to 32% without Tanner Hudson in there. And the names of the Bengals tight ends, I like Drew Sample, Tanner Hudson, all these secondary guys. I forget which is which sometimes, but no, Tanner Hudson out for this one. Eric Gall, we saw the route participation come up. 4 targets in that game for Eric Gall. Now he was recovering from, I want to say, an ACL injury coming into the year, so there was generally considered really talented rookie coming in, could have a good career ahead of him as a pass catching tight end. One of the toughest things for him was, can he overcome this? I want to say ACL. I might be wrong about that, but some sort of injury slowing him down coming into the year. Pretty promising to see 32% route participation already last week for Eric All. Again, and let me go back to the Coach Speak Index. And by the way, if you want access, I don't have any kind of promo code. I have no deal with the Coach Speak Index. I just think they do great work. So I want to give them a shout out because this is where I'm getting a lot of my Coach Speak. I checked this before every site. Here's Zach Taylor on September 19th. About Eric All says, you can put a lot on tight end Eric All's plate. He keeps answering the bell, so you keep going at him. He's really good in multiple phases for offense. We certainly like what we see. And I think that bears that out. We saw him come up a little bit last week in terms of route participation. I think he has the talent. Crutches says, he says ACL. He says, he's my flag plant. Crutches just won $20,000 last night. So maybe you want to trust that guy and go to Eric All. I think it's a really strong play, and coming in at, again, I think it was 0.5% projected ownership on Eric All. That's a spot where, again, you could play 5% and you are lapping the field there in your Eric All ownership. Now, maybe it comes in a little bit higher than 0.5%. I think when you get to these low numbers, there's a lot of volatility there. Maybe he does get up to 4 or 5%. Other people already brought him up in chat, so he's on people's minds a little bit, but I like it. I think he could come in a little bit lower owned than he should because you haven't really seen it yet. Could see that role continue to expand a little bit. So I am pretty interested in Eric All. Gesicki, I think the ownership feels about right at 19.5%. Has not really been like, doesn't seem like they want to use him. Now, he had a great game last week, to be clear, but only up to 53% route participation. He saw 9 targets in that game. Leads the team. Actually has 13 targets on the year. Leads Jamar Chase. I don't think that is going to continue to be the case. I think that was just, they were playing the Chiefs. The Chiefs were taking Jamar Chase away, so they're just going to Gesicki as a little bit of a safety valve. But they were using a rotation, 54% route participation for Gesicki in that one. We had, again, Eric All up to 32%. We still had Drew Sample a little bit involved there, 19.5%. So I don't really want to go too much higher on Gesicki. I also think the return of T. Higgins could lead to more just 11 personnel, just not playing a second tight end. So maybe we see a little bit less of the overall route participation for these tight ends. That's my biggest concern with all of these tight ends in general. But I think Eric All probably Crutches is still probably sub 3%. I like that as a contrarian play. Again, where you're playing tight end position where nobody could do all that much. Maybe he scores a touchdown. Again, it's a great matchup for the receivers. I think it's just a bad overall secondary for the Commanders. So I think the tight ends could take advantage of that too. So I think Eric All, a very, very strong contrarian play at tight end. Gesicki, I think the number is about right for a guy who has 13 targets. It's hard to say like, oh yeah, he should be sub 20% owned on a 2-game slate, but I think it's more likely that the role moves down than stays the same. I don't think he's going to continue to be the target leader on this team. So not really taking a huge stand on Gesicki. I do think being overweight to Eric All makes sense. And then Drew Sample, I don't know. I don't really see this role expanding either. He did have 3 targets in week 2, so I guess that's promising. Maybe a 1% kind of a play where maybe that number is about right on Drew Sample. Any other tight ends that we have not hit on? I mean, we hit on Kincaid, Strange, Gesicki, Zach Ertz. Dawson Knox, I think, is out there enough that you could play some Dawson Knox. Luke Farrell, I don't think I'm going to. Let me just double check the numbers there. 4 total routes. Yeah, I'm not going there. Yeah, I think that we've covered all of the tight ends that are in play for me. Irwin and Hudson inactive. Okay. Yep. I actually didn't realize that Irwin's going to be inactive. I was not planning on playing him anyway with T. Higgins back, but that is good to know. And Hudson, as expected, is inactive. Thanks for that note. Okay. And then defenses, my only note on the defenses would be, I think the Jaguars are a pretty strong defense on this slate. Josh Allen, the second most turnovers of any quarterback last year. So he's great, but we also see him turn the ball over quite a bit because he is a little bit loose with the ball sometimes. And that's part of what makes him great, but it also is great for playing defenses against him. I think I said at the beginning of the show, you can play your defense against your quarterback. So I wouldn't be afraid to play the Jaguars defense against Josh Allen, even if you have Josh Allen in a quarterback. But I think that they're going to be, they're cheap and they're going to go a little bit under owned. So I do like the Jaguars defense some. I don't know that I have any, like, it's not going to be a huge stand for me, but I imagine I'll be overweight to the field there. All right. So that's it for the main slate. And yeah, I've, as usual, forgot to go down to tight ends, defense, kickers. Let's look just briefly at the showdown slates. And I'm just going to pull up because we've done all of the analysis of all the players. So a lot of this just holds over, but let's just take a brief look at the showdown slates. And I can look at FanDuel also for these. So actually, let me look at the full slate for FanDuel, see if anything immediately jumps out at me. Because somebody had asked me earlier to look at FanDuel. So let's just take a look briefly at the full slate. So quarterback, oops. Yeah, so we have Josh Allen at 43%. He is 9,200. Joe Burrow 7,400. Jayden Daniels is actually more expensive than Joe Burrow here. Again, Joe Burrow standing out to me at quarterback as probably the best play at 29%. 18% Jayden Daniels at 7,900. Doesn't really. I think I'm probably a little bit light. I think probably this is a fine number on Jayden Daniels. My instinct is I would want to be higher on Joe Burrow, maybe a little bit lighter on Josh Allen at quarterback. Running back again, I think this number is just too high for James Cook. He's 7,600. I think that there are more interesting lower owned plays. Brian Robinson again, 39%. Looks even better on FanDuel where it's not PPR. I like that number on Robinson. Zach Moss feels fine to me at 41%. Again, there's the concern there that maybe Chase Brown does mix in a little bit more here. Austin Eckler feels okay there. Where's Chase Brown? Yeah, 13.5%. I like that number on Chase Brown on FanDuel. Take some shots there. I think you could get really different on FanDuel. Go to like a Ray Davis. Hope that he scores a touchdown. The PPR stuff doesn't hurt you as much on FanDuel. So I think that's a fine play. Not a huge priority for me, but something I would consider doing on FanDuel. Again, I'm just trying to do this real quick. Just a brief look because most people are just watching DraftKings. So we'll do this and then we'll go to showdown stuff. Wide receiver, again, I think Jamar Chase, just if you want to lock button him, you're totally fine to lock button him. T. Higgins, similar ownership. Similarly, I feel like that's a pretty strong play, could be limited. So we have Kirk at 28.6% here. Wait, can I expand? I want to be able to pull this up so I can see more players at once. Looks like I can't. Okay. Let me sort by ownership. I'm not. All right, where did Chase go? Hang on a second. Gabe Davis, 29%. Shakir, 29. Nobody's really standing out to me. Feels a little bit light on Kirk and Thomas. I think probably like them better than Gabe Davis at lower ownership here. So I think that flips a little bit on FanDuel relative to DraftKings. Coleman at 27% looks good to me. Oh, big drop off here. So Yoshivas at 7%. I like that. I think that's a strong number on FanDuel. Samuel 5%, so a little bit higher number for Samuel on FanDuel. I still think that's fine, worth taking a shot. Mac Hollins 2.5%. I like that number, worth taking a shot. Dammy Brown. Looks like Diami Brown, probably the lowest ownership that I want to take a shot on at 2%. But yeah, similarly, I think you just can mix in these guys. Easier for some of these lower owned guys to hit on FanDuel because it isn't PPR. You don't necessarily need the volume. You can put up 12 fantasy points with a single, catch for 55 yards. And suddenly you're golden. You're looking pretty good relative to the field. So I do like playing some of those more secondary, tertiary options at wide receiver. Tight end, pretty easy for me to want to get away from 52% Dalton Kincaid. Again, the PPR doesn't matter as much. You're just touchdown hunting at the tight end position. I think Ertz a pretty strong bet here at 14%. Strange, really strong at 13%. Strange, probably my favorite here. 13% Strange is too low on FanDuel. Again, if you want to go to Eric All, 1%, minimum priced, 4,000 on FanDuel. Looks like a pretty strong bet. And then defenses, Jaguars, Commanders, 3,800, Bengals, 3,100. Yeah, I think, again, Jaguars, strong bet. Don't really see anything that stands out. Bills, a little bit more expensive and a lot of ownership there. Lean into the volatility. I think I'd like the low-owned Jaguars there on FanDuel. See if I have any other questions before I move on to the showdown slates. Let's see. Yeah, Strange. Ertz look good. Gesicki will be a ghost for like the next 4 weeks. That would not be shocking. Okay. Let's move on. Look briefly at the showdown slate, and then I need to get out and make some lineups. But I do want to look at the showdown slate before we move on to see what prices stand out, what ownership numbers stand out. Because we've looked through all the players. I don't think I have to do that much more analysis of the individual plays. So the first one, Jacksonville at Buffalo. And we'll start with the captain ownership. We've got Allen at 23% projected ownership at captain. That feels maybe even light to me. I like Josh Allen at quarterback at captain quite a bit. Looks like he is 12,000. So they did finally price up the quarterback, which brings down the ownership a bit. But I think that looks pretty strong. Maybe I'll try and build a lineup real quick and see how viable it actually is. James Cook at 11% projected ownership in the captain spot. Honestly, not a huge issue with that. That feels about right. I guess I should say, if you're playing Josh Allen in the captain spot, he is the type of quarterback you can play him naked. You can play him naked in the captain spot. I prefer to stack him anyway. When he's in the captain spot, just limit the number of things you need to get right. Probably going to do some of his damage through the air. Probably not going to be 2 rushing touchdowns every week. So I do prefer having him stacked, especially when he is in the captain spot. Trevor Lawrence, I think you're always stacking, regardless of where he is in your lineup. In the captain spot, I prefer to have multiple pass catchers if you have Trevor Lawrence there. Again, I think theoretically has rushing upside, hasn't really shown it. But if you put Trevor Lawrence in at captain, I prefer to have the double stack. He's higher owned than some of the quarterbacks we've seen recently on slates where they've done, the Aaron Rodgers slate coming in at 5%. Love that. Getting closer to 10% for Trevor Lawrence. Don't love it quite as much. I actually really like this captain ownership on Travis Etienne. So I didn't love him on the main slate, but 8.5% here looks really good to me. Again, I think the Bills giving up the second most fantasy points on the year to running backs, DraftKings fantasy points. So that seems like a good bet there. Don't need to correlate him with anybody if you put him in at captain. So I like that pick a bit. And then I think, these numbers look pretty fair to me, just mixing and matching, hoping one of these guys can put up a big game. Not seeing anybody really standing out as far too low, and I guess I'll keep scrolling. Dalton Kincaid, as much as I'm fading him in general, Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman at 4.6% each. Those seem like pretty good bets at captain. Probably more inclined to play Curtis Samuel, Mac Hollins in the flex in the captain spot. Yeah, so I think the usual suspects at captain. I think Travis Etienne looks great here at this ownership number. Cook looks pretty good. Allen, honestly, I just eat that ownership a good amount of the time. In the flex, man, this feels a little bit light on Josh Allen overall. Maybe I'll try to build a lineup and see if maybe the price is just too prohibitive, but Josh Allen is a pretty good bet to put up some fantasy points. Stronger bet than most on this slate. So I think probably eat that ownership on Josh Allen. Could get a little bit light on Trevor Lawrence. I don't know. It doesn't feel that off to me. I think that number on Trevor Lawrence is fine. Man, these numbers are not standing out to me as terrible. James Cook, Travis Etienne, both at around 35%. Those are kind of my target numbers typically for running back. So wish that they were coming in a little bit hotter than that. But they're coming in at pretty fine ownership numbers to me. Interesting to see how low Kincaid is going owned on the Showdown slate. Here is where I'd be more inclined to. So I'm kind of fading him on the main slate, but ownership coming in a little bit lower here. Keon Coleman, I mean, that stands out to me. 5,800 coming in pretty low owned. I like that. Brenton Strange, love that. 23% on a Showdown slate at 3,000. I think that's a great number. So that would be a number that I would lean into some. Obviously, Tyler Bass, kickers on Showdown. You're allowed to play them. They've been pretty good. 13% Curtis Samuel, if you want to make the bet that he's going to take on a bigger role. I like that as a Showdown play. 8.5% going to Ray Davis. Feels pretty strong. I think you could probably play him with James Cook. Similarly, Ty Johnson, probably not all three of them together, but you could play 2 out of the 3. Bigsby at 5%. Again, the only game he's played, we did see 12 carries and he's 32 under. So I like Bigsby better here than I did on the main slate. I think I like that 5% number on Bigsby and nobody else. I don't know what just happened there. So there you go. I think that is the breakdown of the first one. I'll do the second one real quick and then maybe make a couple lineups before we head out and check for questions also. All right. Again, looking at captain first, Jamar Chase coming in at, that's too light. 17% captain ownership for Jamar Chase. Yeah, sign me up for that. I will be above weight to that all day. I think he has just a mega upside. So I would lean into the ownership on Jamar Chase. Similarly, Joe Burrow and Joe Burrow. I'm not. If I have Joe Burrow captain, I want to have multiple stacking partners in the flex. But I like that number. I think that Joe Burrow, just spread it out. If you have Joe Burrow in the captain spot, have multiple pass catchers in the flex. But I think that's a pretty strong bet there. Jayden Daniels, honestly, same thing. I think I'm eating the chalk at captain. Oh, except for love these numbers on Brian Robinson, Terry McLaurin. Brian Robinson really stands out to me, but I think Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins look good. I would probably lean in there a little bit too. So probably just pushing out, not doing anything too cute with Eckler, Yosheva, Gesicki, Ertz, any of these other at captain. It's probably just kind of eating the chalkier guys on this slate. And then playing these guys obviously in the flex a bit more, but yeah, at captain, probably leaning mostly into Chase, Burrow, Daniels, Robinson, McLaurin, Higgins, Moss is probably where I draw the line. If you make me choose one captain on the slate, probably just eat the Chase chalk. I mean, it's really not that chalky. I think I just go to Jamar Chase if I have to choose one captain in this game. And then at flex, still too low of ownership going to Jamar Chase. Yeah, I'm just willing to eat that. The quarterback's ownership seems totally fine. I think Jayden Daniels could just run quite a bit. Oh yeah, he's one. Jayden Daniels, if you want to play him naked, I think totally viable to play Jayden Daniels naked on the slate. I could see this just being a game where he runs and runs and runs on a run funnel defense. So I do think this is a spot where I'd be willing to play him naked, even at the captain spot. Terry McLaurin at 26% seems good. Higgins 25%. Yosheva's 12.5%. I like that. Ertz, Gesicki. Trying to see who I might be low on. Man, Chase Brown up to 24%. The field is just too sharp. At 4.4K, not taking any kind of stand there. I think that feels about right to me. Maybe even a little high. As much as I like him on the main slate, where at low ownership. No, I think this is, I guess some places have him closer to this on the main slate. So I think 24% probably fine for Chase Brown. I wouldn't play him at captain, but I think 24% seems okay here. these guys, Noah Brown, Luke McCaffrey, getting steamed up a lot more on the Showdown slate than the main slate. Hate to see it because I would love to play them at low ownership. Doesn't look like they're the guys you can get at crazy low ownership. Eric All, 5.5%. I like that number on Eric All. Easier to pay it off on a Showdown slate. Ben Sinnott allegedly going to be more involved over time. I guess you could consider. Oh, and something's going wrong as I'm using this. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm not taking that many stands in this game at the flex. So I really like the Jamar Chase. I think he's just not getting enough ownership. I think I like this 12.5% on Yoshi does kind of stand out to me. But honestly, these kind of mid-range guys, like these seem like lower numbers than you would expect for Brian Robinson. I like that number quite a bit. T. Higgins, Sarah McLaurin, these all seem fairly low to me. So where would I get away from the chalk? Maybe I'd get lightly away from Zach Moss. Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. Probably a little bit. This is a spot where I actually would be a little bit lighter on the Bengals defense, I think, just because I don't think Washington, I guess they have been thrown a good amount, more than I expect, but I feel like that's a little bit high for me on the Bengals defense. Could get a little bit later. I think this Noah Brown number is actually a little bit higher than I think it should be. Actually, all three of these I think might be just a little bit higher. Like I like them all on the main slate, but those are all pretty high to me. I don't know. It's a tough one to take big stands. Let me try to make a few lineups here, but see if you have any questions first, and I'll move this down to question and lineup time. But let me look through question. I'm a little behind in chat, so let me catch up. I wouldn't. So they're different plays. Strange and Ertz definitely like project a lot better. I like Strange and Ertz quite a bit. I think all is just a very good contrarian play. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I like him better, but I think that he is a great, like in a chalky lineup, putting all in there, I think is a really strong way to play it. All right, let's see. Yeah, this is kind of the conclusion that I was coming to. Like the good plays look like they're under-owned on Showdown. Let's see. Let's go. Skull, baby. All right. Yes, definitely okay to fade the Washington pass catchers. You have enough strong pass catching options that I think is totally fine. Like Terry McLaurin, 40% ownership. Then you get the tertiary guys are all like, I like them all as bets, but I think, yeah, if you want to totally fade them, absolutely viable. Bengals pregame looking like a monsoon. Is that true? That's interesting. Any other notes from pregame? Strange captain and all the studs are am I burning money? I think it's viable. You do need a big score at captain. So if you're playing Strange at captain, you're not just hoping for like a 8 fantasy point game. You want him to have 7 receptions and a touchdown. Like you do need him to put up a big score to be the winning captain, I would think. But I don't think you're burning money. Like I don't think he gets there if he puts up 8 fantasy points, but I think it's within his range of outcomes to actually put up maybe not 8 and a touchdown, but 5 receptions and a touchdown. And I guess we do have enough studs in that game. Maybe it's some viable. Okay. Yeah. Crutcher says the Sims gave him some. So yeah, some viable at the very least. All right. I'm going to just make a couple quick lineups and then I got to get going. So let's go. Wait, which contest is this? This Showdown. Wait. Can't figure out where the Showdowns. We have too many slates available. All right, I'm going to go NFL. Showdown captain mode. And then one that starts in, they're all full. Oh, here's one. All right. All right. So the game that is coming up, again, I think the Josh Allen, let's try making a Josh Allen captain lineup, see what we can do with that. I like the idea of mixing in some Curtis Samuel. He's pretty cheap. Throw him in the flex. Probably play at least one more. I like Keon Coleman at 5,800 quite a bit, so play that. And then maybe, do I want the kicker in a Josh Allen lineup? I'm not sure if I love the idea of playing a kicker. Actually, here's where, in an easy way to get different, throw the Jaguars defense in here. Nobody's going to want to play Josh Allen at captain with the Jaguars defense. Maybe they have a pick six and it's great. So I like that idea. And then we can throw in. So we have 9,300 left over. Oh, we have Bretton Strange, I do think, is a very strong play here. So let's go to Bretton Strange. 3,000. Not getting a ton of ownership. Now we have 15,600 left per play. Oh, I only have one player left. That's why. Okay, and then you throw in T-Law or Travis Etienne. Now this is too much left over, I would think, most likely. Maybe not. I mean, Bretton Strange, I think, is capable. I think he's 7 targets last game, probably capable of outscoring everybody more expensive than him. I actually think this is borderline plausible. But I think I would rather, let's see, ETN, Cook. This is borderline playable to me. I don't know that it's quite, it might be a little bit too rich. Go away from Jaguars defense. It's hard to argue. Like, I think that I could see all of these players outscoring the players up to where they get. So Curtis Samuel up to 9,800. I think you could outscore Shakir, Kincaid, all these guys pretty easily, not out of the realm of possibility. Coleman would be the tough one. You need to get up to 11,600. So he needs to outscore. I would need Keon Coleman in this lineup to outscore ETN and James Cook and Shakir, and I guess just the running backs is where, but I think that's plausible for Keon Coleman to outscore them. Jaguars defense needs to outscore everybody up to Shakir, which is plausible. Yeah, I think this leaves 5,800 only for the largest field GPP, but you can see it's pretty easy actually to play a lineup with Josh Allen at captain. I guess that's the final takeaway. So you can play, if I want to go up from, if you don't like Curtis Samuel, go up to Dalton Kincaid. Like, you're still leaving 1,600 on the table in a Josh Allen double stack lineup. You got Trevor Lawrence with the guy he targeted 7 times last week, Jaguars defense in there. This one probably a more viable, likelier to hit type of lineup. So I think that is totally possible. All right. What's up, fellas? Yeah, Jim Money, lock in 20 minutes. Good point. I need to be quick here. So let me make one more, but I'm going to do this one on the other game because I've got some lineups to make. So now we'll go to the one that starts in an hour. And this one, like I said, I think I'm just going to eat the Chase, the Burrow. Now you have 5,500 left per player. So let's get who's cheap here. Who do we like? I mean, Eric All 200. Let's give it a shot. Gives us a lot more salary to work with. Zach Ertz pretty cheap. I mean, he's fairly priced. This might be a spot where we go to kickers. Eric McPherson. Chase Brown, pretty cheap. Maybe go to Chase Brown instead of Zach Moss. And then do we want Jayden Daniels naked? I think it's totally viable to play Jayden Daniels naked. So that's one way you can play it. Could also go up from Eric McPherson to, I don't know who's available here, Yoshivas, if you wanted to. That gets to be a lot of Bengals players. No, I think that, yeah, it gets to be a lot of Bengals receivers without Joe Burrow in the captain spot if you do that, but I think it's still viable. Chase, yeah. Maybe we could go up from, instead of Chase Brown, I think Zach Ertz here makes some sense, and you do get a stack there with Jayden Daniels, which you don't need to do, but it doesn't hurt. Leaves 1,200 on the table. Like, that's a viable lineup. So I think that does it. I think I've answered. Who are you going over on? That's nuts. Yeah, I mean, we talked about Eric All, Andre Yoshivas, Chase Brown. I think I'm going over. I guess that's not that nuts, kind of getting some ownership, but Eric All, I guess, is the lowest one that isn't getting any ownership. Diami Brown. Anyway, I need to get going and make my lineups. Really appreciate all of you hanging out. Again, check out 3M Abrasives on YouTube for the premiere tomorrow at 11 if you want to see the reality TV show that my wife is involved with. If you have not already liked and subscribed to this channel, The Flannelverse, really would appreciate it. Trying to get to 3,000 subscribers here within the next few weeks. 5,000 by the end of the year is the goal. So would appreciate it if you subscribed to the YouTube channel, like the video, comment, all of that. Really appreciate all of you hanging out with me. Hopefully we can make some money on one of these 3 slates at least. Let's get some money in here tonight. Thanks, guys, and I will catch you on Thursday.